Welcome to this video. I'm currently researching Viking age scabbards and sword scabbard suspension systems for my book, and based on the results I thought it was about time to give my old trusty Viking training sword a facelift. Now, the scabbard for this sword I did about 10 years ago, and it consists of a wooden core that is wrapped in textile. On the inside it is lined with fur, as confirmed by archaeology. There are various systems and various layers that a historical scabbard would be wrapped in. Usually it's linen, or rather a coarse textile on the outside covering the wooden core, and then leather on top of it, or vice versa. And the lining could consist of either textile or fur. Now this scabbard, as you can see, the point of it is tightly wrapped and wound with textile bands. And again, this is a historical method. It is seen in numerous period depictions, and it is also confirmed by archaeology. Most of you are probably familiar with Scabbard shapes, oftentimes cast from copper alloy, and a number of these do exist. However, they are comparably rare if compared to the number of swords that are still in existence. So it's likely that scabbard shapes were not that widespread in the Viking Age as one might assume. Instead, it's more likely that systems like this were a lot more common with the Vikings or with early medieval swords in general. The scabbard is also wound with crisscrossing bands on the lower half, and this again is something that we see in period artwork a lot. And we also have a contemporary account from a chronicler named Notka Bambulus, and he describes the scabbard of Charlemagne and describes the various layers, and also points out that on the outside it is strengthened by little crosses. Now, I think what he means by this are probably just the crisscrossing textile bands that are confirmed by archaeology as well as period depictions. The textile bands that are wound around the scabbard and that are seen in period art so often may well have had a meaning. These X designs, these crisscross patterns, are not only visible on scabbards, you also see them inlaid into blades. So there may be some meaning to it, some deeper meaning that as of now we have little understanding of. I have extended this design by means of little brass pins, and decorating a scabbard with pins is confirmed by a find from Hedeby Harbour. Scabbard number 1 from Hedeby Harbour is indeed decorated with little bronze pins. I have also put a new handle onto this sword, so now the grip curves very slightly inwards, which is quite typical for many surviving grips on original swords. Also, you will note that the top edge is somewhat narrower than the one close to the crossguard. And the design on this sword is also one which I have copied from a surviving grip which was carved from antler. It is kept in the historical museum, the State Historical Museum in Stockholm in Sweden, and it also features this interesting X design if you look closely. The grip terminals are decorated and secured by fine silver wire, which is braided, and it is a technique that is usually referred to as a Turks Head. oftentimes associated with much later weapons, but I have actually found one example from the Viking Age, namely on the sword from Żydowo, and it is kept in Poland, and this sword shows exactly this kind of design. Now, with this particular specimen here, it was very challenging to braid the wire in this fashion because the hilt was already assembled, and it was sword maker Jan Naujoks, the Berggeist, the mountain spirit, who did this really beautiful job. He also put on these twisted silver wires that you see up here. This is a very common feature on many Viking Age swords, and there are grooves that are cut and molded into the pommel cap, and they are oftentimes filled with silver wire, and that's why I had Jan put on silver wire onto this sword here too. The pommel is hollow cast, but this one here is a one-piece construction. Usually in the Viking Age, sword pommels consisted of two parts, and then the tang would be peened over the upper guard, the pommel bar, and the pommel cap would be put on separately. Often it was peened by means of a rod that passes through the pommel. It was peened underneath the pommel bar. This particular example here is peened over the pommel cap, so the tang runs through the grip and pierces the pommel, and it is peened here. We do see a tang being peened over the pommel cap with the sword from Żydowo, but that's a very rare example. Usually you have the two-part construction, a so-called Geibig construction type 2. The sword belt that I made is based on an example from Cronkmoor on the Isle of Man, coming from a Viking grave. However, it's not the exact fittings, but it's the same system as with that surviving example. Of course, the original leather or maybe textile straps have decayed, so we only have the bronze or copper alloy fittings that survive from that sword suspension system, and there have been a couple of reconstructions. Now, I made my very own one, and I'm very, very happy with it. It makes for a two-point suspension system, and it's very versatile. It nicely secures the sword, and I'm going to explain that in a future video. But it's basically the system that I also presented in an illustration that I made for my book, and it is in line with period depictions. Thank you very much for your interest and for your support via Patreon.